Hi, a few of you may remember a short while back I was interviewed by BBC South East, and they took the story of the council, Crawley Borough Council, having £38 million put away in an account, and for some unknown reason it had to be a negative story. Well, in actual fact, it isn't a negative story. And I'm here today to interview Councillor Bob Lanzer, who is the leader of Crawley Borough Council, about where that £38 million is going and how it's going to improve our town and the tourist potential here in Crawley, which can only be a very good thing. Bob, what's your role within the council, and what do you do for the people of Crawley?
I'm the leader of the Crawley Borough Council, and I'm responsible for strategic policy direction, and within that particular areas like finance, property, emergency planning and communications, so that those areas as well. It's a very interesting and rewarding role. There's always something different happening in Crawley. So.
Yeah. Now, recently we were both interviewed by BBC South East regarding a pot of money that the council have.
Yes.
And I'm here specifically to almost put that right, in a sense, because they used the only negative thing that I said in the interview in the piece that they wanted to use, and obviously made the council look a little bit like the bad one. Why have you got this money when we're suffering? Now, I understand that the £38 million that the council have put aside is already earmarked for future rejuvenation of Crawley Town Centre and other projects. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, thanks for the question, Shelley, and the opportunity to speak about this, because yes, most of our our reserves are capital reserves, and they're earmarked for new projects. For example, bringing on Town Centre North, and also half a dozen or so other town centre development sites. For example, a Station Way and the Sussex House site as well. And so we got spending plans for that money, and there are other projects right across the town, like working on some of the privately owned neighbourhood centres in the same way we have with the council-owned neighbourhood parades, and other quite expensive projects. For example, the desilting of Ifield Mill Pond and the flood prevention measures that we're undertaking at Tilgate Park and in other locations. So all the money has a good future and current purpose. So.
It has a home already.
Indeed, that's a very good way of putting it. We intend to spend it. We don't hoard cash for the sake of it, and our track record in recent years is very good. In recent years we've spent about £35 million on the Decent Homes programme, remembering that we have some 8,000 council houses, and it's right to bring them up to a really good standard for our tenants.
Yeah, in the interview that we had with the BBC, my statement about having to wait 5 years for a council kitchen when I was a council tenant was some 20 odd years ago, and the statement followed on from me then saying how much I felt the council had improved and people now don't have to wait so long. Do you feel the same way? Your housing policies have moved on a gear, haven't they?
Indeed, and it's strange the BBC didn't report the fact that it was so long ago, and we're in a situation now where we're committed to bringing about customer service excellence in our housing area, bearing in mind that some 20% of all Crawley homes are still owned by Crawley Borough Council. That's surely the right thing to do, and we've moved on a great deal since then. We've made a lot of internal changes to improve our customer service, and we shall continue to do that because it's the right thing to do for our tenants.
Now let's go back to this £38 million and what you're about to spend it on, or what the plans are for the future. We are going to have pretty much this side of the town demolished and rejuvenated, or what's going to happen with that? We're
committed to a major regeneration project within the town centre, and we have called that Town Centre North, focused upon the boulevard. We're in a different world now, because we signed off an agreement to develop Town Centre North at the end of 2008, but then we plunged into recession. So realistically and practically, what we're going to be doing is looking at the scope and scale of that scheme and making it right for the times. We still want to achieve a retail step change in Crawley by bringing on a John Lewis and other new stores as well. But the way we do that will change. We have to appreciate that there's not the scope for as many retail outlets as there was at the beginning of 2009. So we want to be realistic, but we still want to take the opportunity as the economy recovers to steal a march on our competitors such as Brighton and Croydon, quite frankly, and to get that retail step change in Crawley. But there's some half a dozen other sites in the town centre as well, as I previously mentioned, like Station Way, where we can work with others to bring about a worthwhile change.
I mean, let's not forget that we have Gatwick on our doorstep. Now, Gatwick could potentially bring in an awful lot of revenue, probably more than what we are grabbing at this very moment in time. A rejuvenation of the Crawley Town Centre with a John Lewis, surely that can do nothing but good and positive to the town, as in drawing people, visitors to Gatwick to come and shop here first, rather than travelling maybe straight to Brighton and Croydon, as you say.
I think that's absolutely right. We're talking here about making Crawley even more of an important destination in its own right, and not just a kind of town beside the airport, though we're already much more than that as well. I think a really vibrant shopping centre with good public transport links is essential to achieve that. And I agree with your comments about the airport. We're proud to have an international airport within Crawley Borough, and of course that's under new management now, and it's just recently in this bad weather shown how good it is, in that it's been open a good deal more than some other airports in the UK, and I think we should be proud of that fact as well.
Now let's, moving on from that, let's talk a little bit about the snow. It has obviously disrupted quite a lot in the town at the moment. Now the Crawley Borough Council did distribute grit bags around the town centre, and unfortunately some nice kind fellow chap, whoever it might have been, have decided to come along and do those on your behalf and take them for themselves. Wasn't that right?
Well, I think it's more taking the grit away from the priority areas. I think there were some 45 grit bags, and they deliberately put in priority areas with steep slopes and hills designed for the residents in the locality to use and to help themselves and their neighbours. So it's unfortunate that some of the grit went for other purposes. Nevertheless, we shall continue with the scheme, and we're in the process of working with the County Council to restock those grit bags right now with this second snow episode that we're in at the moment.
Can I ask, try not to be diplomatic in any way, this weather is going to carry on. It's going to be an annual thing as far as we're aware. We were warned quite a few years back that this would happen, and it has come to light that this is going to be a normal occurrence each year. Are the council going to reconsider and reconstruct their plans for how to get grit to houses, like in the old days when we had the yellow bins at the end of the roads that were then filled up and locked, and a responsible homeowner or council tenant had responsibility for the key, so that nobody could steal or borrow, should we say, the grit meanwhile. And of course, obviously not letting anybody put any rubbish or anything like that into the bins at the same time, because it would be quite important to have it handy when needed. Are the council thinking of sitting down and restructuring their plans for the snow?
I think we have to, and when I say that, I refer to the West Sussex County Council and the Crawley Borough Council. And I just mentioned that the government has just commissioned a scientific study into the likelihood of this weather repeating itself or becoming more common or becoming more severe in future years, so that we can plan to deal with it. And that might imply more snow clearing vehicles and revised distribution of grit and salt as well. And again, there's an example at Gatwick Airport where they've got about 49, I think it is, snow clearance vehicles of different types, and they're increasing to 95, which will give them a capability to mirror that of Oslo Airport. So that's the kind of a proactive measure that we need to be looking at as well. What we wouldn't be able to do is to maintain a small standing army of people able to clear every residential road, because nobody would want to pay for that. But what we do need to do is to improve our ability to respond to the severe weather and review what we do. I think we're doing better now than we did at the beginning of 2010. Our response looks more sure-footed, but there's always more we can do to improve.
obviously supplying grit to the local communities and having it there so they can then help themselves on areas that they feel, because there's always that discrepancy, isn't there, where the council feel that, well, Tollgate Hill is amazingly hilly, may need more supplies of grit than other areas, but then other people may feel, well, I've got a wheelchair user who lives in my street, I feel that we would need that particular amount of grit in our... There is always the discrepancy of what is thought of as most important in the town, although I hear that on a daily basis. In your eyes, giving the tools to the community to help themselves is probably the best way to go so far, isn't it?
I would say so, and I do take your point that a council will not always know best. I mean, we can make an estimate of those areas which we think are most vulnerable, and sometimes it's really obvious, a 1 in 4 slope or whatever, that clearly it would be good to have some grit quite nearby. But in line with the principle of localism, which is what the government today advocates, this idea of local people being close to decision making, we should be taking more note of that as well, and taking the feedback in deciding where to deploy grit and salt stocks.
So if anybody had any comments, constructive may we add, on how they feel grit may have been better utilised, can they email you, can they write into you, can they give their... You are listening to the people, aren't you?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we don't have any kind of monopoly on wisdom ourselves, or the county council, and so it would be good to hear what people think to inform our efforts for the future, for the next snowfall, whenever that might be.
Excellent. And they can get in touch with you directly, or how would they write?
I would suggest writing to our Amenity Services division.
And that's at the town hall?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll put the full address up anyway on the write-up. But we would like to say that we don't believe that the 38 million needed to be a negative story. In actual fact, we are quite aware of what yourself and the rest of the council have in plans for the 38 million, and I would like to say that on behalf of the community, I'm sure we're quite proud that you didn't then squander that on something else, leaving us hanging in maybe 2011 and 2012 without any money to do that sort of rejuvenation, because we need it here in Crawley, especially this side of the town.
Yeah.
The shops this side are finding it very hard, aren't they?
Well, they do. They are. Well, thanks very much for your comments, Shelley. That's much appreciated. And I'd also add, thanks to sound financial management, despite the government increasing the amount of savings we've got to make, we will be able to deal with that because of the sound financial management. So. Can
I just point out, though, that I do hear across the board from a lot of people who are under the governance of other councils, and Crawley Borough Council actually do us very proud. I've heard a lot of people talking about their councils not supplying any grit. I've heard about their councils squandering the money that they may have earmarked for rejuvenation on helping out with the recession, which in fact it was put there for a reason. It should have stayed there for the reason, which is what you've done.
Yeah.
Now obviously we are all struggling, and councils are making cutbacks, but again I also hear people saying their councils are making much bigger, larger, impactful cutbacks than what Crawley Borough Council are at the moment.
Well, I think that's the case, and we do all that we can to preserve our frontline services. And if you look back over the last 4 years, I think you'd be hard pressed to identify a major service cut of any kind. And indeed, we have an expansionist agenda for our services, particularly in the area of leisure and culture. And that might not seem an intuitive thing to do, but if you manage your finances correctly and work with other partners, you can expand your service offer, and that's our intention.
And the money has already started being spent on the Bewbush, the new Bewbush Centre. That's already a rejuvenation of Bewbush shops. Looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
You've had Langley Green shops have had their new Art Deco style rejuvenation, which makes it look very nice, and their new community centre as well over the road.
Yes.
And I believe something in Pound Hill Way, there's been something already built.
Well, in terms of Bewbush and Langley Green, these are major neighbourhood regenerations, and major neighbourhood centre regenerations. And of course, we've worked variously with the West Sussex County Council and with the Primary Care Trust on delivering this. And I pay tribute as well to the ward councillors for both Bewbush and Langley Green for the way that they were the inspirational force as well behind these improvements. And they make a real difference for our people in Bewbush and Langley Green. And we were absolutely determined, despite the recession, to make absolutely sure that we could bring those schemes to completion. We would originally have been selling some property and land, but of course we couldn't do that in the recession because the values were too low, so we deliberately injected some of the capital that we referred to, the 38 million, to make sure those schemes could actually go ahead in the recession and still have the ability to sell certain other assets later for a reasonable price once we came out of recession, meaning that we could put it into yet more improvements. And of course we're nearing the completion of our kind of tour of the council-owned neighbourhood parades, with Furnace Green due to complete in 2011. Now, in time, we will revisit those neighbourhood parades and do more work on them. But meanwhile, it's our aim to start looking at some of the privately owned parades, such as Broadfield Barton, and to work with partners there to see what improvements we can bring about on those neighbourhood centres as well. Because the fact that we've got a privately owned area doesn't mean that we can't do anything and trigger some improvements.
But that's quite a good example of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, 38 million, isn't it? The Broadfield Centre, Bewbush Centre, the new Bewbush Centre, really makes the parade look much better. It's much more proactive, and it's there for the people of Bewbush and surrounding areas, and I think that they really do appreciate what they've got now, and I'm sure that as time goes on they will appreciate it more and more. But of course, if you had used that money and left Bewbush Parade looking like a building site and used that money to help with the so-called recession and cutbacks, then of course you would have been damned if you didn't. Because people would say, well, what about, you know, you started this work, why aren't you finishing it? It's a bit like that, isn't it, sometimes? It
is. I mean, you're quite right, nobody really wants to see an unfinished site for any length of time. But I tell you what we do want to see, because we want to regenerate the town centre, as I mentioned earlier. What we want to see are cranes, because they're a symbol of regeneration, of activity. We don't want all the cranes stuck in Dubai, which is where they currently are. We'd rather like to see a few cranes in Crawley and actually working to regenerate here.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
Okay, pleasure.
Thank you.